I can see I can hear the sound. Hello, everyone. We are live now. Welcome to our event. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Margaret, and with me today is Alex Yarosh. I'm the part of Metabase marketing team, and Alex is the main author and the analyst behind the report we released just a couple of weeks back. So we hope you've seen that. What we did is we surveyed 338 teams on how they choose data stack, when they choose what tools. We then did the analysis on what are the reasons behind the choices, how they differ based on the industry or size of the teams, of the companies, and so on. So I will just paste a link right here to the report, if just in case you haven't seen it. But today, Alex will walk you through the most interesting things we discovered. Also, approaches, how she approached the analysis in general. And we are happy to answer any questions you have, or maybe any observations you have as well. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. If you cannot see us or hear us at some point, also please let us know. I'll be there to make sure everything is working fine. And other than that, I'm happy to start. So Alex, if you're ready, let's go to it. Perfect.
All right, let's get started. And so, as Margaret said, my name is Alex. I'm a part of the success engineering team, and I did build this report. But while we're here, I would also like to thank Margaret for actually designing this survey and doing some pre-processing. Without her, we would not have this wonderful data. So thank you, Margaret. And also to introduce another participant, this is my cat. He's probably just gonna hang out here because he's a very anxious boy and he needs to be on my lap constantly. So sorry if he just like walks across the screen at some point. So in today's session, I want to go through a couple of things that I found especially interesting around the DataSec report. Like Margaret said, we asked questions around like, what kind of tools you're using, why did you choose them, when did you choose them? But before I begin, I want to give like a word of warning that first of all, there's of course a lot of data, and I will not go through all of it, so you are encouraged to look at this page, but also that any results that I show you today come with two caveats, right? So first of all, a lot of the people we surveyed were Metabase users, not exclusively Metabase users. There are still like plenty of people who are not using Metabase, but we did send the survey to all our customers, and so they comprise a sizable portion of our respondents. The reason I'm saying this is because you have to keep this in mind when thinking about like, how is this data representative of broader industry trends? For example, we have a lot of people using Metabase. So do the trends represent everyone, or is there some confounding variable that makes people choose Metabase and also like choose other tools or have certain attitudes to AI? This is something that's very hard to say, and definitely does not questions that are not answered in the report fully, but just something for you to keep in mind. And the second thing to keep in mind before I begin, that the survey is determined by the questions we asked, right? So there were certain things we asked about, and there were certain options that we gave people. And so we don't see the information that we didn't ask for. For example, we asked people about their choice of modeling tools or ETL tools, but we did not ask them like, did you use an orchestration tool, or do you use a data catalog? So there are some things that are missing, but because that's the kind of information we were interested in. So just keep those two things in mind as I go through. And let's get started. So first, I want to introduce the kind of people we were talking to. Most of the folks we talked to were in tech, No surprise here. Most were in mid-sized companies, so starting around between 20 and 100 people, and most of them were people in some sort of data or engineering role. So keep that in mind as we go through the survey. What's interesting here is that we kind of see that technology industry is overrepresented here. So when I was doing this analysis, if we're talking about the approach to it, I hoped that maybe we could see interesting trends by industry, but because it's mostly technology, that means that breaking out by industry, breaking out the response, like say which data storage tool you use or how you use AI, is less meaningful just because it's such a skewed distribution. So I kind of did not really look at technology at an industry that as much as I had hoped, just because it doesn't make statistical sense to do this with a distribution like this. So we're looking at mainly mid-sized companies in tech, and our respondents are mainly data people with a few like non-technical or less technical roles. So let's start with the actual data teams. These are data people, so we ask them about our data teams. What's interesting to me here is that we discovered that data teams are usually small, and that is not just because we are in mid-sized companies. Like, yeah, okay, if you have a 50 people company, you probably have maybe like 1, 2 data people. That's not surprising. But what was surprising is that even in companies with 500 employees, which by the way, we had quite a few of them, we see data teams that are either non-existent or small. Like imagine if you have a company of 500 employees and you have like 2 data scientists. That's a pretty skewed ratio. But most data teams are still small, even though we are in what, like year 20 of big data revolution. But as we discover later in the report, that the size of the data team does not actually affect as much as I thought maybe when I started looking at the survey. It does not affect that, for example, how well versed are non-technical people in your data, how well your tools work together, how much you like the tools that you're using, how do you choose those tools. Really, we see that most data teams are small, but the size of the data team did not seem to have a lot of effect on any other things that we asked about. So once we figured out that the teams are usually small, we started thinking, okay, so what about people who are not on the data team? What about everyone else? So we asked people about the self-service culture in their organization, right? So, and the self-service has been a buzzword for, I don't know, at least 10 years right now. Everyone wants self-service. Everyone wants business users to be able to get the data that they want and like not send constant requests to the data team. But the reality of the situation, even at least in the respondents that we surveyed, is that it's pretty like low even this far into this self-service hype cycle. That like self-service rated is usually around like 6 for most people. And what does a 6 mean for you? Like for me, 6 means just like, yeah, I guess some people can write queries, but mainly that's probably just doesn't happen very often. So when I saw this, I started asking myself, like, what is it that can influence the perceived level of self-service culture, or at least among the questions that we asked about? First thing I asked is, does the size of the data team affect self-service score? Because we see that most data teams are small. Maybe if you have a bigger size team, maybe you have better self-service. And I discovered that no, there was just like very little relationship between self-service score and data team size. I also looked at like which tools you use, how much you like those tools. Not really a lot of relationship. The only like real relationship I found is around company size and industry. So generally bigger companies have lower levels of self-service culture, and the more kind of old school industry is, like logistics or manufacturing, the lower self-service scores are. But I mean, that's fun, right? And that kind of aligns with how we think about um, business users accessing their data and building their own charts and dashboards. But that's not really an actionable insight. Like, oh, how do I improve self-service in my company? Make it smaller. Like that doesn't make any sense, right? So the fact that I could not find anything around like the tooling or the data team size that actually correlates well with the self-service culture is pretty interesting. But you might ask, as of what, last 2 years or so, we have a great tool that's supposed to increase, they're supposed to enable basically everyone to work with their own data. And that's AI, right? I even have like AI here in Metabase. So we ask people questions around AI to understand, are non-technical users actually using AI? So does this contribute to self-service culture? If they are using, does it make any difference? And what we found that in most organizations that we surveyed, either no one or like very few non-technical teammates were actually using AI to get the results of their data. Like you see that 45% of our organizations, just non-technical users, just do not use AI, which is very interesting, right? Because we have this promise of AI as an enablement tool for, you no longer have to like learn SQL or know how to use even a BI tool. You can just chat with your data. But in reality, non-technical teammates aren't using AI that much, at least not among the sample that we had. So the next question is, well, does this usage, like I see, there are some organizations that have 25% using AI, does this usage actually contribute to um, how well the service culture is perceived in the organization? And this is a graph that I spent some time staring at, and I really don't know if I can conclude anything out of this. So one thing that you can notice here that, well, yes, if we have 75% of non-technical employees using AI, you have a very high rating of self-service culture. But can I trust this score considering it's only like 10 people said this, or is especially this one, like 4 people saying this? So if I just look at the pure rating, it seems like the more non-technical users are using AI, the higher perceived level of self-service. But I would pretty much be hesitant to make this conclusion just because of sample sizes. And since we're talking about the approach to making this report, that's why in the original report, if you go, I always include sample sizes for all of the data that I present to you, just because you should be able to make your own conclusion, right? Like, yeah, this graph shows what I wanted to show, but is this data reliable? I don't know. Like, yes, this is how I want it to look, but I would be against probably trusting it. So we have relatively low levels of self-service across all organizations. When we have the self-service decreasing with the organization size, which is predictable, but we also have pretty low level of AI adoption. But let's look at what people are actually using AI for. And among the people that we asked, the most prevalent use case is code development and SQL generation. That's probably not surprising considering most people that we surveyed were data analysts, data engineers, software engineers. Remember that thing I showed you earlier? What's interesting is that among the use cases that we asked people about, the least popular one was AI-powered dashboards and reporting, right? Because that is something that a lot of people think is the use of AI in, say, a BI tool, just like build me a dashboard from this data. But in reality, that's not how people are currently using AI. Probably that's going to change in a few, years, months. We certainly at Metabase are building something exciting in that respect. Maybe if I have a couple of minutes, I'll talk to you about this. But mainly it's just code generation, SQL querying, kind of the things that everyone is used to by now. So let's talk about this query generation that most people use AI for. I only included one of these plots in here, but I started looking at how people are using SQL generation across like industries, across roles, across company sizes, across like funding stages, and the picture was pretty clear that most people use AI for query generation at least occasionally, with the only one exception, which I included here, is finance industry. What's interesting is that people who say that they work in finance industry, not even 50% of people are using SQL generation in production. Kind of makes sense because finance is a highly regulated industry. You probably don't want to use a tool that's pretty non-deterministic to generate, your important code. And that brings us to the other chart that I'm showing here, is the trust score in AI results. So I just mentioned that, pretty much everyone across all the dimensions were using AI all the time, but they don't trust it. In fact, if you go to the full report, I also give a breakdown by like roles and industries. And for example, the more technical a person is, the less they trust AI, but they still use it all the time. Which I thought it was very interesting insight, because I don't really trust AI. I use it for SQL generation, but then I review the results. So very low trust score, but near universal adoption. So, like I said, the goal of the survey was to understand really what drives how people build their data teams and their stacks and the data culture in their organization. So part of it was, like I said, self-service and giving the business users power to analyze their data. How does AI play into this? What do people actually do with AI? But another part of it is literally just tools that you use. So we asked a lot of questions around specific tooling at specific parts of the data pipeline. How do people make their choices? How happy are they with their choices? And how these choices, influence in general how they perceive their culture and their organization. So we asked about several specific tools in your data stack. We asked about your operational or transactional database. We asked about analytics storage. We asked about ingestion or ETL tools, modeling, BI, and reverse ETL. So what's interesting to us is that we found that almost everyone we asked for has been separating their analytics storage into a separate store. That was a bad English sentence. But very few people were actually storing their analytics data in their operational database. This was interesting to me because that is quite a change from, even if you were in the industry, I don't know, say 10 years ago, I think that percentage would have been much lower. But now people are adopting dedicated storage for analytics data all the time and pretty early. You can see a breakdown in the full report of when exactly do people think it's necessary to start separating data into analytics. We also see a very high level of adoption of business intelligence tools, which is, again, not surprising because many of the people we surveyed were Metabase users, and Metabase is a business intelligence tool. But the most interesting part of this is the adoption of ingestion and modeling tools. I'll talk about them a little more later, but it's about the same level. So as many people said that they're using ingestion tools as they said using modeling tools, and most of these people are intersect. So we have a Venn diagram that is almost a circle of people using ingestion tools and modeling tools. And that suggests something interesting, that those things that are traditionally separate in the data stack, but we see that people are adopting them at the same time. And as I'm going to be scrolling out later, we'll see later that some of the tooling is actually the same. Like people say they use the same tools for like ETL to move the data and modeling. And that is a industry trend that I think is relatively recent. I don't know, like 10 years ago, we had this whole thing around modularization of tools, the emergence of modern data stack. Like we have, here is my separate tool for moving things. Here's my separate tool for transforming things. And they play very well together. Whereas in the last few years, we've been seeing this trend of consolidation. I don't know if you've heard recently some news about some of the data tools buying some other data tools. We just had a rumor of Fivetran possibly buying DBT like 2 days ago. And that we see across many companies and many parts of like data infrastructure, that tools start to consolidate back and start to do more than one thing. And again, if I have time at the end, I'll show you a sneak peek of us. We are also on this trend, and we are also building some of the exciting stuff in all of these parts of this data stack. So we'll see. But what is also interesting in this picture is I also plotted the average like happiness rating by the tool. And you see that people are pretty happy with their storage, people are happy with their modeling, sort of happy with their BI, and real kind of unhappy with like ETL, and this is reverse ETL. But if you notice, I also asked them a question about like, how do you feel about your data stack overall? And this rating is 695, which is lower than an average rating for any specific tool. Right? So that is very interesting to me, because people seem to like individual things in their data stack, but not like the stack as a whole. And together with the fact that the ingestion and the reverse ETL also have lower scores, suggests that really it's not individual tools that matter most, but how do these tools play together? Like you might have, the best database and the best BI tool in the world, but if you can't like establish that connection between them seamlessly, that doesn't really matter. And that also feeds into this consolidation trend that I mentioned, that a lot of people are just like, well, it's hard to move things from one place to another, so let's just build a single place for them. So then we started asking people about each individual piece of the data pipeline. How did they feel about it? And we started with operational or transactional databases. And we asked people, what were your main considerations? Like, why did you pick whatever database you're using at the moment? And you might, before I looked at the results of this question, I thought, how would I pick my operational database? I don't know, maybe like I would look at performance, how reliable it is. But what we saw in the survey is that overwhelmingly, the most important consideration was actually familiarity. And then I thought about it, and well, yeah, I guess that makes sense, right? Because when do you pick your operational database? When you're probably just starting out your product. By the way, we saw a lot of, we saw a lot of like mid-sized companies with like 20 to 50 people. So these are pretty early. So when you're just starting out, familiarity is a lot more important than all these other stuff. Cost is like pretty much almost no one actually mentioned cost as the primary concern, which was very interesting to me. And then we asked people, okay, so you have these considerations. Based on this, how do you make the choice of your operational database? And what was interesting is that kind of regardless of what your main consideration was, whether it was familiarity, whether it was performance, most people just choose Postgres. So like we have this variety of concerns, but Postgres is probably pretty good at addressing most of them. The only one being where it's less than 50% is being scalability, but also scalability, very few people rated it. So Postgres is pretty good at everything, and as well as being the first database and an operational database. And that's actually the majority of people, like significant majority of people just use Postgres regardless of their reasons for, like, their main considerations for picking a database. It's also the most highly rated thing that we've seen so far. People when we ask people how happy are you with your database, people who are using Postgres said that it's almost everyone was very happy about it. And in gray here, I included also how happy were these people with the entirety of their stack. And look at this difference for Postgres. Like whatever else garbage is going on in your stack, if there is Postgres, that's the one thing you're happy with. So then let's move on from operational database and start asking about analytics. And that I got very interesting results around what type of tool people are using for storing analytics. So we see that 46% of people, so almost half of our respondents, are actually not using what we see as a dedicated analytics storage like a data warehouse or a data lake. They just use a general purpose database. Is just a separate database from their operational one. This is kind of distributed by company size. We see that larger companies are more likely to adopt data warehouse, which makes sense. You probably adopt a data warehouse when you have a lot of data that needs a lot of tending to. And you might ask which general purpose database people are choosing. You will never guess the answer. But before we get to the answer, let's look at the considerations for choosing the analytical storage. Remember when we were talking about why do people pick the operational databases that they pick, they said, I just want people to know what they're working with. Whereas for their analytical database, it's a very different story. The number one thing is cost. I was surprised that cost wasn't higher for operational database, but for storage, more so than for any other tools we look at, cost is the primary driver. And I included a breakdown here of which database people choose based on what is their primary consideration. There are a couple of interesting things here that Postgres here in the traditional Postgres blue color is no longer like the number one thing that people pick for everything. But for example, if I have concerns about user friendliness, I'm maybe picking Snowflake. Or if I have concerns about performance, maybe I'm picking BigQuery. So there is a lot more variability here and not really a clear winner for any specific category except maybe user friendliness and Snowflake. I don't know if I agree with user friendliness of Snowflake, but you do you. Still, we see that by absolute numbers, by just literally adding everyone up, the people still just use Postgres. Like, yeah, we have these data warehouses like Snowflake coming up second, but it's still a huge amount of people just use Postgres as both their operational database and their analytics database. However, this is where I'm going to remind you again of the caveats that I mentioned. Remember, I mentioned that a lot of our survey respondents are Metabase users. Metabase treats Postgres as a primary database, so it's kind of not a surprise that a lot of Metabase users are Postgres users. But at least from my experience, that also reflects more general trends, at least for the kind of companies that we surveyed, which was mid-sized tech companies with like at least some people on the data team. All right, so next we asked people whether they use an ingestion tool, and around 67%, 2/3 said that they do, and that they're not very happy about it. I consider anything that's below like 8 average is pretty unhappy. And when we ask them which tool that they use, that kind of illuminated us why people are generally not happy, because we got a ton of responses, so many that I can't even fit them on one screen. A variety of different tools that people use to just move data from one place to another, with built in-house being still number one. And I'm saying still because we asked a similar question, I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, in a similar survey. And built in-house was still number one then, and it's still number one now, despite the gigantic leaps that the data industry has taken since then. Still, if we want to move data from one place to another, we're just building it ourselves. That kind of makes sense, right? Because really, it is so dependent on what's your sources and what your target is that sometimes it's really easier to just build something bespoke for your own data and your own system than trying to wrangle Fivetran to do that for you. When we asked about what are the most important considerations, it's cost and integrations variety. And we see that people are choosing built in-house mainly based on cost, or they're choosing Airbyte, right, which is open source. But if you want integrations variety, it's a lot less clear. Like Fivetran comes a little bit on top there, and Airbyte as well. But user friendliness, not built in-house. So that's just such an interesting consideration to me, because like, we have these dedicated tools, but if I want something familiar that also is reliable, that is also really have source available, I'm probably just going to build in-house. If you look at the full report, I recommend you also review the reverse ETL section, because I find it also very interesting. For those of you not familiar, reverse ETL, right, it's moving data back and writing data back into the warehouse. And all of these things are mirrored in the reverse ETL tool considerations as well as in ETL tools. So, sorry, my cat is sitting on my keyboard. I need to move my laptop a little bit. There we go. So, next we asked, where is my mouse? Next we asked about modeling. And about the same amount of people as use the ETL tools said that they use modeling tools, but there the picture was much clearer. Most of the people we asked just said that they used dbt. I was surprised by how down below SQL Mesh was, because I hear about it a lot, so I expected to see it much higher. But a lot of people are still using just SQL as a modeling tool. And something to keep in mind here, that if you use SQL to model your data, you might not have answered that you use a modeling tool. So probably the actual percentage of people who like have a separate thing, whether it's a separate like SQL script or a separate tool doing transformation or modeling, is probably higher than this. considering not everyone would consider just using SQL as using a tool. So the dbt is very prevalent. It's also the tool that was the number one mentioned tool when we asked, what do you wish you were using from the start? We asked this question and got a ton of answers. You can download the raw data to see the variety of very interesting responses. And dbt was one that people mentioned most frequently as, wish I had this when I started. Why do people choose the tools that they choose for modeling? Data transformations capability is one, but cost is not really a concern, right? It's integration and functionality. Interesting, because for ETL, functionality was not the primary concern, but it is for modeling. And we see here that regardless of the consideration, dbt is very popular, except when your most important consideration is familiarity, in which case SQL is most popular, which is fair, but also, like, if you know SQL, dbt is not far away. So, all right. And the final thing, I am coming up on time here, so I'm going to move a little quicker through the last thing, is around use of business intelligence. This one is very skewed, right? As you can see, most of the people we asked are Metabase users, so take everything on this tab with a grain of salt. But the interesting thing that I wanted to show you here is, let's see. Oh, where is it? Oh, there we go. If you look through our reports, you will find, I did not go through every single one because, as you can see, I don't have that much time. But for each tool, I broke out the happiness by role. And there are some interesting patterns there that pretty much all software engineers are really grumpy and they always are unhappy with any tools they use. But here I want to show you something that the actual end users of the tool, so like, who is business intelligence for, right? Probably not software engineers, probably not data engineers. Those are the people who work with it every day, but not the people who are like the target audience of a BI tool. But people who are the target audience of a BI tool, so people like CEOs, product managers, are actually relatively happy with what they have. But people who have to do everyday maintenance, like data engineers, are pretty unhappy with what they have, which is, I think, is an interesting dichotomy, because that kind of happens a lot. We see that the people who have to work with something every day give a lower rating, but if they don't have to work with it every day, they give it a higher rating. Anyway, so these are the things that I liked about the data stack survey. There are, like I said, some challenges that were presented by how skewed our data is, the distribution of it, the fact that a lot of the dimensions that we hoped were meaningful, like maybe company size, maybe industry, turned out to be not very meaningful, right? Or, like I mentioned, data team size. Turns out it doesn't influence business, it doesn't influence self-service score or like tool satisfaction or when you adopt certain tools at all. So I tried to pick some insights that I found interesting and unexpected, and you can see a lot more of these in the full report. So I really recommend you read this, but we also have a blog post that does a little summary if you don't want to read the full report and want to read just the key takeaways. Sort of a version of what I presented today. So I am at 12:40 as I planned. So I'm going to stop right now and see if I have any questions. Are there any questions for me?
So I'm unmuting myself as well. Thank you very much for going through this. And I also will repeat that if you haven't yet, we really recommend you to go through the report. Every tab has more detailed, even more detailed information. But I really appreciate, Alex, how you picked like the interesting granular things. Even some of that weren't shown at the report, so it was a nice angle. Let us know if you have any questions in the chat. The chat has been pretty silent up to this point. So if you have any questions or observations, or maybe you know have seen some of these patterns in your company, it would be great to know. Other than that, we are running this report yearly, and so we'll be happy to have you among our next responders. So keep an eye on the next announcement.
Maybe while people are thinking whether they want to ask any questions, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we are planning at Metabase that reflects some of the trends we see in the survey. So I am going to share my screen. So this is our public roadmap. You can see it on our website. And I want to point out a few of the things here. There's a lot here, as you can imagine. But a few of the things that kind of align with what we've seen so far. First of all, you can see that there is a lot of AI-backed SQL editing. I mentioned that, you know, that's the most common type of AI thing, and other AI like result summaries, quick actions, and other kind of. Our AI has access to many tools, and you can already actually try it out. This is available for everyone, I think, as of recently or in a few days. So AI at Metabase, it's there. You can try it out. One thing that is coming very soon, and it's probably one of my most favorite things Metabase is ever released, is this thing called transforms. And it says it's a better way to pre-compute models, which I think is kind of underselling it. But we are basically building a data transformation tool into Metabase. So you can do, you know, most of everyday transformations like cleaning, joining, you know, pre-computing metrics, all that kind of stuff within Metabase without leaving it. And we say it's a better way to pre-compute models. If you use models, you know that they're kind of like, they're great. I love models. I made a video about them. You can go watch it. But it's not the most performant thing. And if you really want to do like proper ETL, models are maybe not what you choose, but transforms will give you a way to do this actually like in your data warehouse, but from inside Metabase by writing Metabase queries. You can use like Metabase Query Builder. You can use CodeGen, very exciting thing that we are releasing, code generation for transforms. So this is what I was talking about, like consolidating different tools, like Metabase is a BI tool, but we're going to have a transformation and modeling much more robustly built into the product itself. And some other things I wanted to mention, the data catalog and data dependency management. So we are starting to think about how to build a data catalog and data lineage tooling into Metabase as well. Again, right, this trend of consolidating things from different tools. And let's see. Well, revamp models, I already talked about it. All right, well, some of the stuff is not on the roadmap, so I'm not going to talk about it. But yeah, so AI, building native transformation capability, building native data lineage capability is something that we're going to be doing at Metabase soon. So that I'm going to stop sharing now. And
That's very exciting. I just wanted to say that we are cooking up the webinar about the Metabot and probably some other cool features that we're gonna launch soon. So beware or wait when we announce it's gonna happen. I hope in the next week or so. All right. So we have a question in the chat. I think it's just one. So let's,
Yeah, the question is, you think this is biased for Snowflake versus GCP due to impersonated RLS feature? I almost moved to Snowflake just for that. Very possible. It kind of depends on what is the thing you choose, right? If the thing that you choose is a BI tool, like you really want to work with, I don't know, Metabase, right? But you have flexibility in choosing the rest of your stack accordingly, then yes, sure. We definitely have a lot of customers who are like this, who are just like, Metabase is what I'm choosing, and I'm building the rest of it to make sure it plays around with Metabase. But I think there's also a sizable population where, you know, they choose the other parts of the stack first, like they choose using Snowflake, and then they just kind of plug in whatever BI tool works best for them. I think that's probably a little bit more common, but like I said, considering we are talking to Metabase users, yes, among them, the tools that work well with Metabase features are going to be represented. But it's interesting to hear that there are people who consider switching like a database just because of Metabase tools. All right, I like this. All right,
Cool.
anything else?
Yeah, so I didn't see any more questions in the chat. Thank you for joining us today, Alex. Thanks very much for running the presentation of the report and some like interesting things that weren't covered directly. Everyone will gonna receive the recording if you want to go back to this. But other than that, thanks very much for joining today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye bye.